Velocity by D.Koontz. It's just the first few chapters, an excerpt from my iPhone from the iBooks app is where I'm reading it. Starts with some quotes. A man can be destroyed but not defeated. Ernest Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea. And now you live dispersed on ribbon roads, and no man knows or cares who is his neighbor, unless his neighbor makes too much disturbance, but all dash to and fro in motor cars, familiar with the roads and settled nowhere. T.S. Eliot. Choruses from The Rock. Part 1, the choice is yours. Chapter 1. With draft beer and a smile, Ned Parasol raised a toast to his deceased neighbor, Henry Friddle, whose death greatly pleased him. Henry had been killed by a garden gnome. He had fallen off the roof of his 2-story house onto that cheerful-looking figure. The gnome was made of concrete. Henry wasn't. A broken neck, a cracked skull. Henry perished on impact. This death by gnome had occurred 4 years previously. Ned Parasol still toasted Henry's passing at least once a week. Now, from a stool near the curve of the polished mahogany bar, an out-of-towner, the only other customer, expressed curiosity at the enduring nature of Ned's animosity. How bad a neighbor could the poor guy have been, that you're still so juiced about him? Ordinarily, Ned might have ignored the question. He had even less use for tourists than he did for pretzels. The tavern offered free bowls of pretzels because they were cheap. Ned preferred to sustain his thirst with well-salted peanuts. To keep Ned tipping, Billy Wiles, tending bar, occasionally gave him a bag of Planters. Most of the time, Ned had to pay for his nuts. This rankled him, either because he could not grasp the economic realities of tavern operation, or because he enjoyed being rankled, probably the latter. Although he had a head reminiscent of a squash ball and the heavy, rounded shoulders of a sumo wrestler, Ned was an athletic man, only if you thought barroom jabber and grudge-holding qualified as sports. In those events, he was an Olympian. Regarding the late Henry Friddle, Ned could be as talkative with outsiders as with the lifelong residents of Vineyard Hills. When, as now, the only other customer was a stranger, Ned found silence even less congenial than conversation with a foreign devil. Billy himself had never been much of a talker, never one of those barkeeps who consider the bar a stage. He was a listener. To the out-of-towner, Ned declared Henry Friddle was a pig. The stranger had hair as black as coal dust, with traces of ash at the temples, gray eyes bright with dry amusement, and a softly resonant voice. It's a strong word, pig. You know what the pervert was doing on his roof? He was trying to piss on my dining room windows. Wiping the bar, Billy Wiles didn't even glance at the tourist. He'd heard this story so often that he knew all the reactions to it. Friddle, the pig, figured the altitude would give his stream more distance, Ned explained. The stranger said, what was he, an aeronautical engineer? He was a college professor. He taught contemporary literature. Maybe reading that stuff drove him to suicide, the tourist said, which made him more interesting than Billy had first thought. No, Ted said impatiently. The fall was accidental. Was he drunk? Why would you think he was drunk? Ned wondered. The stranger shrugged. He climbed on a roof to urinate on your windows. He was a sick man, Ned explained, plinking one finger against his empty glass to indicate the desire for another round. Drawing Budweiser from the tap, Billy said Henry Friddle was consumed by vengeance. After silent communion with his brew, the tourist asked Ned Purcell. Vengeance, so you urinated on Friddle's windows first? It wasn't the same thing at all, Ned warned in a rough tone that advised the outsider to avoid being judgmental. Ned didn't do it from his roof, Billy said. That's right. I walked up to his house like a man, stood on his lawn, and aimed at his dining room windows. Henry and his wife were having dinner at the time, Billy said. Before the tourists might express revulsion at the timing of this assault, Ned said they were eating quail, for gosh sakes. You showered their windows because they're eating quail. Ned sputtered with exasperation. No, of course not. Do I look insane to you? He rolled his eyes at Billy. Billy raised his eyebrows as though to say, what do you expect of a tourist? I'm just trying to convey how pretentious they were, Ned clarified. Always eating quail or snails or Swiss chard. Phony bastards, the tourist said, with such a light seasoning of mockery that Ted Purcell didn't detect it, although Billy did. Exactly, Ned confirmed. Henry Friddle drove a Jaguar, and his wife drove a car. You wouldn't believe this. A car made in Sweden. Detroit was too common for them, said the tourist. Exactly. How much of a snob do you have to be to bring a car all the way from Sweden? The tourist said, I'll wager they were wine connoisseurs. Big time. Did you know them or something? I just know the type. They had a lot of books. You've got 'em nailed, Ned declared. They'd sit on the front porch, sniffing their wine, reading books. Right out in public, imagine that. But if you didn't pee on their dining room windows because they were snobs, why did you? 1,000 reasons, Ned assured him. The incident of the skunk, the incident of the lawn fertilizer, the dead petunias. And the garden gnome, Billy added as he rinsed glasses in the bar sink. The garden gnome was the last straw, Ned agreed. I can understand being driven to aggressive urination by pink plastic flamingos, said the tourist, but frankly not by a gnome. Ned scowled, remembering the affront. Ariadne gave it my face. Ariadne who? Henry Friddle's wife. You ever heard a more pretentious name? Well, the Friddle part brings it down to earth. She was an art professor at the same college. She sculpted the gnome, created the mold, poured the concrete, painted it herself. Having a sculpture modeled after you can be an honor. The beer foam on Ned's upper lip gave him a rabid appearance as he protested. It was a gnome, pal. A drunken gnome. The nose is as red as an apple. It was carrying a beer bottle in each hand. And its fly was unzipped, Billy added. Thanks so much for reminding me, Ned grumbled. Worse, hanging out of its pants was the head and neck of a dead goose. How creative, said the tourist. At first I didn't know what the hell that meant. Symbolism, metaphor. Yeah, I figured it out. Everybody who walked past their place saw it and got a laugh at my expense. Wouldn't need to see the gnome for that, said the tourist. Misunderstanding, Ned agreed. Right, just hearing about it. People were laughing, so I busted up the gnome with a sledgehammer. And they sued you. Worse, they set out another gnome, figuring I'd bust up the first Ariadne had cast and painted a second. I thought life was mellow here in the wine country. Then, they tell me, Ned continued, if I bust up the second one, they'll put a third on the lawn. Plus, they'll manufacture a bunch and sell them at cost to anyone who wants a Ned Purcell gnome. Sounds like an empty threat, said the tourist. Would there really be people who'd want such a thing? Dozens, Billy assured him. This town's become a mean place since the pate and brie crowd started moving in from San Francisco, Ned said sullenly. So when you didn't dare take a sledgehammer to the second gnome, You were left with no choice but to pee on their windows. Exactly, but I didn't just go off half-cocked. I thought about the situation for a week. Then I hosed them. After which Henry Friddle climbed on his roof with a full bladder looking for justice. Yeah, but he waited till I had a birthday dinner for my mom. Unforgivable, Billy judged. Does the mafia attack innocent members of a man's family? Ned asked indignantly. Although the question had been rhetorical, Billy played for his tip. No, the mafia's got class. Which is a word these professor types can't even spell, Ned said. Mom was 76. She could have had a heart attack. So, the tourist said, while trying to urinate on your dining room windows, Friddle fell off his roof and broke his neck on the Ned parasol gnome. Pretty ironic. I don't know ironic, Ned replied, but it sure was sweet. Tell him what your mom said, Billy urged. Following a sip of beer, Ned obliged. My mom told me, honey, praise the Lord, this proves there's a God. After taking a moment to absorb those words, the tourist said, she sounds like quite a religious woman. She wasn't always, but at 72 she caught pneumonia. It's sure convenient to have God at a time like that. She figured if God existed, maybe he'd save her. If he didn't exist, she wouldn't be out nothing but some time wasted on prayer. Time, the tourist advised, is our most precious possession. True, Ned agreed, but Mom wouldn't have wasted much because mostly she could pray while she watched TV. What an inspiring story, said the tourist, and ordered a beer. Billy opened a pretentious bottle of Heineken, provided a fresh chilled glass, and whispered, this one's on the house. It's nice of you, thanks. I'd been thinking you're quiet and soft-spoken for a bartender, but now maybe I understand why. From his lonely outposts farther along the bar, Ned Parasol raised his glass in a toast. To Ariadne, may she rest in peace. Although it might have been against his will, the tourist was engaged again. Of Ned, he asked, not another gnome tragedy? Cancer. 2 years after Henry fell off the roof, I sure wish it hadn't happened. Pouring the fresh Heineken down the side of his tilted glass, the stranger said, death has a way of putting our petty squabbles in perspective. I miss her, Ned said. She had the most spectacular rack, and she didn't always wear a bra. The tourist twitched. She'd be working in the yard, Ned remembered almost dreamily, or walking the dog, and that fine pair would be bouncing and swaying so sweet you couldn't catch your breath. The tourist checked his face in the back bar mirror, perhaps to see if he looked as appalled as he felt. Billy, Ned asked, didn't she have the finest set of mamas you could hope to see? She did, Billy agreed. Ned slid off his stool, shambled toward the men's room, paused at the tourist. Even when cancer withered her, those mamas didn't shrink. The leaner she got, the bigger they were in proportion. Almost to the end, she looked hot. What a waste, huh, Billy? What a waste, Billy echoed as Ned continued to the men's room. After a shared silence, the tourist said, you're an interesting guy, Billy Barkeep. Me? I've never hosed anyone's windows. You're like a sponge, I think. You take everything in. Billy picked up a dishcloth and polished some Pilsner glasses that had previously been washed and dried. But then you're a stone, too, the tourist said, because if you're squeezed, you give nothing back. Billy continued polishing the glasses. The gray eyes, bright with amusement, brightened further. You're a man with a philosophy, which is unusual these days, when most people don't know who they are or what they believe or why. This, too, was a style of barroom jabber with which Billy was familiar, though he didn't hear it often. Compared to Ned Pearsall's rants, such boozy observations could seem erudite, but it was all just beer-based psychoanalysis. He was disappointed. Briefly, the tourist had seemed different from the usual two-cheek heaters who warmed the barstool vinyl. Smiling, shaking his head, Billy said, "Philosophy. You give me too much credit." The tourist sipped his Heineken. Although Billy had not intended to say more, he heard himself continue, "Stay low, stay quiet, keep it simple. Don't expect much, enjoy what you have." The stranger smiled. "Be self-sufficient, don't get involved. Let the world go to hell if it wants." "Maybe," Billy conceded. "Admittedly, it's not Plato," said the tourist, "but it is a philosophy." "You have one of your own?" Billy asked. "Right now, I believe that my life will be better and more meaningful if I can just avoid any further conversation with Ned." "It's not a philosophy," Billy told him. "That's a fact." At 10 minutes past 4, Ivy Elgin came to work. She was a waitress as good as any and an object of desire without equal. Billy liked her but didn't long for her. His lack of lust made him unique among the men who worked or drank in the tavern. Ivy had mahogany hair, limpid eyes the color of brandy, and the body for which Hugh Hefner had spent his life searching. Although 24, she seemed genuinely unaware that she was the essential male fantasy in the flesh. She was never seductive. At times she could be flirtatious, but only in a winsome way. Her beauty and choir girl wholesomeness were a combination so erotic that her smile alone could melt the average man's earwax. "Hi, Billy," Ivy said, coming directly to the bar. "I saw a dead possum along Old Mill Road, about a quarter mile from Cornell Lane." "Naturally dead or roadkill?" he asked. "Fully roadkill." "What do you think it means?" "Nothing specific yet," she said, handing her purse to him so he could store it behind the bar. "It's the first dead thing I've seen in a week, so it depends on what other bodies show up, if any." Ivy believed that she was a haruspices. Haruspices, a class of priests in ancient Rome, divined the future from the entrails of animals killed in sacrifices. They had been respected, even revered by other Romans, but most likely they had not received a lot of party invitations. Ivy wasn't morbid. Haruspice did not occupy the center of her life. She seldom talked to customers about it. Neither did she have the stomach to stir through entrails. For a haruspice, she was squeamish. Instead, she found meaning in the species of the cadaver, in the circumstances of its discovery, in its position related to the points of the compass, and in other arcane aspects of its condition. Her predictions seldom, if ever, came true, but Ivy persisted. "Whatever it turns out to mean," she told Billy as she picked up her order pad and a pencil, "it's a bad sign. A dead possum never indicates good fortune. I've noticed that myself. Especially not when its nose is pointing north and its tail is pointing east." Thirsty men trailed through the door soon after Ivy, as if she were a mirage of an oasis that they had been pursuing all day. Only a few sat at the bar, the others kept her bustling table to table. Although the tavern's middle-class clientele were not high rollers, Ivy's income from tips exceeded what she might have earned had she attained a doctoral degree in economics. An hour later, at 5 o'clock, Shirley Trueblood, the second evening waitress, came on duty. 56, stout, wearing jasmine perfume, Shirley had her own following. Certain men in barrooms always wanted mothering. Some women, too. The day shift, short order cook, Ben Vernon, went home. The evening cook, Ramon Padillo, came aboard. The tavern offered only bar food: cheeseburgers, fries, buffalo wings, quesadillas, nachos. Ramon had noticed that on the nights Ivy Elgin worked, the spicy dishes sold in greater numbers than when she wasn't waitressing. Guys ordered more things in tomatillo sauce, went through a lot of little bottles of Tabasco, and asked for sliced jalapenos on their burgers. I think Ramon once told Billy they're unconsciously packing heat into their gonads to be ready if she comes on to them. No one in this joint has a chance at Ivy, Billy assured him. You never know, Ramon had said coyly. Don't tell me you're packing in the peppers too. So many I have killer heartburn some nights, Ramon had said, but I'm ready. With Ramon came the evening bartender, Steve Zillis, whose shift overlapped Billy's by an hour. At 24, he was 10 years younger than Billy, but 20 years less mature. For Steve, the height of sophisticated humor was any limerick sufficiently obscene to cause grown men to blush. He could tie knots in a cherry stem with just his tongue, load his right nostril with peanuts and fire them accurately into a target glass, and blow cigarette smoke out of his right ear. As usual, Steve vaulted over the end gate in the bar instead of pushing through it. How are they hanging, Kimosabe? 1 hour to go, Billy said, and I get my life back. This is life, Steve protested, the center of the action. The tragedy of Steve Zillis was that he meant what he said. To him, this common tavern was a glamorous cabaret. After tying on an apron, he snatched 3 olives from a bowl, juggled them with dazzling speed, and then cut them one at a time in his mouth. When 2 drunks at the bar clapped loudly, Steve basked in their applause, as if he were the star tenor at the Metropolitan Opera, and had earned the adulation of a refined and knowledgeable audience. In spite of the affliction of Steve Zillis' company, this final hour of Billy's shift passed quickly. The tavern was busy enough to keep 2 bartenders occupied as the late afternoon tipplers delayed going home, and the evening drinkers arrived. As much as he ever could, Billy liked the place during this transitional time. The customers were at peak coherency and happier than they would be later, when alcohol washed them toward melancholy. Because the windows faced east and the sun lay west, softest daylight painted the panes. The ceiling fixtures layered a coppery glow over the burnt red mahogany paneling and booths. The fragrant air was savory with the sense of wood flooring, pickled and stale beer, candle wax, cheeseburgers, fried onion rings. Billy didn't like the place enough, however, to linger past this end of his shift. He left promptly at 7. If he'd been Steve Zillis, he would have made a production of his exit. Instead, he departed as quietly as a ghost dematerializing from its haunt. Outside, less than 2 hours of summer daylight remained. The sky was an electric Maxfield Parish blue in the east, a paler blue in the west, where the sun still bleached it. As he approached his Ford Explorer, he noticed a rectangle of white paper under the driver's side windshield wiper. Behind the steering wheel, with his door still open, he unfolded the paper, expecting to find a handbill of some kind, advertising a car wash or a maid service. He discovered a neatly typed message. If you don't take this note to the police and get them involved, I will kill a lovely blonde school teacher somewhere in Napa County. If you do take this note to the police, I will instead kill an elderly woman active in charity work. You have 6 hours to decide. The choice is yours. Billy didn't at that instant feel the world tilt under him, but it did. The plunge had not yet begun, but it would soon. Chapter 2. Mickey Mouse took a bullet in the throat. The 9mm pistol cracked 3 more times in rapid succession, shredding Donald Duck's face. Lanny Olson, the shooter, lived at the end of a fissured blacktop lane against the stony hillside where grapes would never grow. He had no view of the fabled Napa Valley. As compensation for his unfashionable address, the property was shaded by beautiful plum trees and towering elms, brightened by wild azaleas, and it was private. The nearest neighbor lived at such a distance that Lanny could have partied 24/7 without disturbing anyone. This offered no benefit to Lanny because he usually went to bed at 9:30. His idea of a party was a case of beer, a bag of chips, and a poker game. The location of his property, however, was conducive to target shooting. He was the most practiced shot in the sheriff's department. As a boy, he'd wanted to be a cartoonist. He had talent. The Disney-perfect portraits of Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck fixed to the hay bale backstop were Lenny's work. Ejecting the spent magazine from his pistol, Lenny said, "You should have been here yesterday. I had shot 12 roadrunners in a row, not a wasted round." Billy said Wile E. Coyote would have been thrilled. "You ever shoot at ordinary targets?" "What would be the fun in that?" "You ever shoot the Simpsons?" "Homer, Bart, all of them but Marge," Lenny said. "Never Marge." Lenny might have gone to art school if his domineering father, Ansel, had not been determined that his son would follow him into law enforcement as Ansel himself had followed his father. Pearl, Lenny's mother, had been as supportive as her illness allowed. When Lenny was 16, Pearl had been diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Radiation therapy and drugs sapped her. Even in periods when the lymphoma was controlled, she did not fully regain her strength. Concerned that his father would be a useless nurse, Lenny never went away to art school. He remained at home, took up a career in law enforcement, and looked after his mother. Unexpectedly, Ansel was first to die. He stopped a motorist for speeding, and the motorist stopped him with a .38 fired point blank. Having contracted lymphoma at an atypically young age, Pearl lived with it for a surprisingly long time. She had died 10 years previously when Lenny was 36. He'd still been young enough for a career switch and art school. Inertia, however, proved stronger than the desire for a new life. He inherited the house, a handsome Victorian with elaborate millwork and an encircling veranda, which he maintained in pristine condition. With a career that was a job but not a passion, and with no family of his own, he had plenty of spare time for the house. As Lanny shoved a fresh magazine in the pistol, Billy took the typewritten message from a pocket. "What do you make of this?" Lanny read the 2 paragraphs while, in the lull of gunfire, blackbirds returned to the high bowers of nearby elms. The message evoked neither a frown nor a smile from Lanny, though Billy had expected one or the other. "Where'd you get this?" "Somebody left it under my windshield wiper." "Where were you parked?" "At the tavern." "An envelope?" "No." "You see anyone watching you? I mean, when you took it out from under the wiper and read it?" "Nobody." "What do you make of it?" "That was my question to you," Billy reminded him. "A prank, a sick joke." Staring at the ominous lines of type, Billy said, "That was my first reaction, but then..." Lanny stepped sideways, aligning himself with new hay bales, faced with full-figure drawings of Elmer Fudd and Bugs Bunny. "But then you ask yourself, what if..." "Don't you?" Sure, every cop does all the time. Otherwise, he ends up dead sooner than he should, or shoots when he shouldn't. Not long ago, Lanny had wounded a belligerent drunk who he thought had been armed. Instead of a gun, the guy had a cell phone. But you can't keep what-ifing yourself forever, he continued. You've got to go with instinct. And your instinct is the same as mine. It's a prank. Besides, you've got a hunch who did it. Steve Zillis, said Billy. Bingo. Lanny assumed an isosceles shooting stance. Right leg quartered back for balance, left knee flexed, 2 hands on the pistol. He took a deep breath and popped Elmer 5 times as a shrapnel of blackbirds exploded from the elms and tore into the sky. Counting 4 mortal hits and 1 wound, Billy said, the thing is, this doesn't seem like something Steve would do or could. Why not? He's a guy who carries a small rubber bladder in his pocket so he can make a loud farting sound when he thinks that might be funny. Meaning? Billy folded the typewritten message and tucked it in his shirt pocket. This seems too complex for Steve, too subtle. Young Steve is about as subtle as the green apple nasties, Lanny agreed. Resuming his stance, he spent the second half of the magazine on bugs, scoring 5 mortal hits. What if it's real? Billy asked. It's not. But what if it is? Homicidal lunatics only play games like that in movies. In real life, killers just kill. Power is what it's about for them, the power and sometimes violent sex, not teasing you with puzzles and riddles. Ejected shell casings littered the grass. The westering sun polished the tubes of brass to a bloody gold. Aware that he hadn't quelled Billy's doubt, Lanny continued, even if it were real, and it's not, what is there to act upon in that note? Blonde school teachers, elderly women. Somewhere in Napa County. Yeah. Napa County isn't San Francisco, Lanny said, but it's not unpopulated barrens either. Lots of people in lots of towns. The sheriff's department plus every police force in the county together don't have enough men to cover all those bases. You don't need to cover them all. He qualifies his targets, a lovely blonde school teacher. That's a judgment, Lanny objected. Some blonde school teacher you find lovely might be a hag to me. Didn't realize you had such high standards in women. Lanny smiled. I'm picky. Anyway, there's also the elderly woman active in charity work. Jamming a 3rd magazine in the pistol, Lanny said, a lot of elderly women are active in charities. They come from a generation that cared about their neighbors. So you aren't going to do anything? What do you want me to do? Billy had no suggestion, only an observation. Seems like we ought to do something. By nature, police are reactive, not proactive. So he has to murder somebody first. He isn't going to murder anyone. He says he will, Billy protested. It's a prank. Steve Zillis has finally graduated from the squirting flowers and plastic vomit school of humor. Billy nodded. You're probably right. I'm for sure right, indicating the remaining colorful figures fixed to the triple-thick wall of hay bales. Lanny said, now, before twilight spoils my aim, I want to kill the cast of Shrek. I thought they were good movies. I'm not a critic, Lanny said impatiently, just a guy having some fun and sharpening his work skills. Okay, alright. I'm out of here. See you Friday for poker. Bring something, Lanny said. Like what? Jose's bringing his pork and rice casserole. Leroy's bringing 5 kinds of salsa and lots of corn chips. Why don't you make your tamale pie? As Lanny spoke, Billy winced. "We sound like a group of old maids planning a quilting party." "We're pathetic," Lanny said, "but we're not dead yet." "How'd we know?" "If I were dead and in hell," Lanny said, "they wouldn't let me have the pleasure of drawing cartoons. And the shore's in heaven." By the time Billy reached his Explorer in the driveway, Lanny Olson had begun to blast away at Shrek, Princess Fiona, Donkey, and their friends. The eastern sky was sapphire. In the western vault, the blue had begun to wear off, revealing gold beneath and the hint of red, gesso, under the gilt. Standing by his SUV in the lengthening shadows, Billy watched for a moment as Lanny honed his marksmanship and, for the 1000th time, tried to kill off his unfulfilled dream of being a cartoonist. Chapter 3. An enchanted princess, recumbent in a castle tower, dreaming the years away until awakened by a kiss, could not have been lovelier than Barbara Mandel, abed at the Whispering Pines. In the crest of lamplight, her golden hair spilled across the pillow, as lustrous as bouillon poured from a smelter's cauldron. Standing at her bedside, Billy Wiles had never seen a bisque doll with a complexion as pale or as flawless as Barbara's. Her skin appeared translucent, as though the light penetrated the surface and then brightened her face from within. If he were to lift aside the thin blanket and sheet, he would expose an indignity not visited on enchanted princesses. An enteral nutrition tube had been inserted surgically into her stomach. The doctor had ordered a slow, continuous feeding. The drip pump purred softly as it supplied a perpetual dinner. She had been in a coma for almost 4 years. Hers was not the most severe of comas. Sometimes she yawned, sighed, moved her right hand to her face, her throat, her breast. Occasionally she spoke, though never more than a few cryptic words, not to anyone in the room, but to some phantom of the mind. Even when she spoke or moved her hand, she remained unaware of everything around her. She was unconscious, unresponsive to external stimulation. At the moment she lay quiet, brow as smooth as milk in a pail, eyes unmoving behind their lids, lips slightly parted. No ghost breathed with less sound. From a jacket pocket, Billy took a small wire-bound notebook. Clipped to it was a half-size ballpoint pen. He put them on the nightstand. The small room was simply furnished: 1 hospital bed, 1 nightstand, 1 chair. Long ago, Billy had added a bar stool that allowed him to sit high enough to watch over Barbara. Whispering Pines Convalescent Home provided good care, but an austere environment. Half the patients were convalescing, the other half were merely being warehoused. Perched on the stool beside the bed, he told her about his day. He began with a description of the sunrise and ended with Lanny's shooting gallery of cartoon celebrities. Although she had never responded to anything he'd said, Billy suspected that in her deep readout, Barbara could hear him. He needed to believe that his presence, his voice, his affection comforted her. When he had no more to say, he continued to gaze at her. He did not always see her as she was now. He saw her as she'd once been, vivid, vivacious, and as she might be today if fate had been kinder. After a while, he extracted the folded message from his shirt pocket and read it again. He had just finished when Barbara spoke in murmurs from which meaning melted almost faster than the ear could hear. "I want to know what it says." Electrified, he rose from the stool. He leaned over the bed rail to stare more closely at her. Never before had anything she'd said in her coma seemed to relate to anything that he said or did while visiting. Barbara. She remained still, eyes closed, lips parted, apparently no more alive than the object of mourning on a catafalque. Can you hear me? With trembling fingertips he touched her face. She did not respond. He had already told her what the strange message said, but now he read it to her just in case her murmured words had referred to it. When he finished, she did not react. He spoke her name without effect. Sitting on the stool once more, he plucked the little notebook from the nightstand. With the small pen, he recorded her 7 words and the date that she had spoken them. He had a notebook for each year of her unnatural sleep. Although each contained only 100 3x4-inch pages, none had been filled, as she did not speak on every or even most visits. I want to know what it says. After dating that unusually complete statement, he flipped pages, looking back through the notebook, reading not the dates, but just some of her words. Lambs could not forgive. Beef-faced boys. My infant tongue. The authority of his tombstone. Papa, potatoes, poultry, prunes, prism. Season of darkness. It swells forward. One great heave. All flushes away. 23, 23. In her words, Billy could find neither coherence nor include any. From time to time, through the weeks, the months, she smiled faintly. Twice in his experience, she had laughed softly. On other occasions, however, her whispered words disturbed him, sometimes chilled him. Torn, bruised, panting, bleeding. Gore and fire. Hatchets, knives, bayonets. Red in their eyes, their frenzied eyes. These dismaying utterances were not delivered in a tone of distress. They came in the same uninflected murmur with which she spoke less troubling words. Nevertheless, they concerned Billy. He worried that at the bottom of her coma, she occupied a dark and fearsome place, that she felt trapped and threatened and alone. Now her brow furrowed and she spoke again, the sea. When he wrote this down, she gave him more. What it is. The stillness in the room grew more profound, as if countless fathoms of thickening atmosphere pressed all currents from the air, so that her soft voice carried to Billy. To her lips, her right hand rose as though to feel the texture of her words, what it is that it keeps on saying. This was the most coherent she had been in coma, and seldom had she said as much in a single visit. Barbara, I want to know what it says, the sea. She lowered her hand to her breast. The furrows faded from her brow. Her eyes, which as she spoke had roved beneath their lids, grew fixed once more. Pen poised over paper, Billy waited, but Barbara matched the silence of the room. And the silence deepened and the stillness until he felt that he must go or meet a fate similar to that of a prehistoric fly preserved in amber. She would lie in this hush for hours or for days or forever. He kissed her, but not on the mouth. That would feel like a violation. Her cheek was soft and cool against his lips. 3 years, 10 months, 4 days, she had been in this coma into which she had fallen only a month after accepting an engagement ring from Billy. Chapter 4. Billy did not have the isolation that Lanny enjoyed, but he lived on an acre shrouded by alders and deodar cedars, along a lane with few residences. He didn't know his neighbors. He might not have known them even if they had lived closer. He was grateful for their disinterest. The original owner of the house and the architect had evidently negotiated each other into a hybrid structure, half bungalow, half upscale cabin. The lines were those of a bungalow. The cedar siding, silvered by the weather, belonged on a cabin, as did the front porch with rough-hewn posts supporting the roof. Unlike most bipolar houses, this one appeared cozy. Diamond pane, beveled glass windows. Pure bungalow looked bejeweled when the lights were on. In daylight, the leaping deer weather vane on the roof turned with lazy grace, even in turbulent scrambles of wind. The detached garage, which also contained his woodworking shop, stood behind the house. After Billy parked the Explorer and closed the big door behind it, as he walked across the backyard toward the house, an owl hooted from its perch on the ridgeline of the garage roof. No other owls answered, but Billy thought he heard mice squeak, and he could almost feel them shivering in the shrubbery, yearning for the tall grass beyond the yard. His mind felt swampy, his thoughts muddy. He paused and took a deep breath, savoring air redolent of the fragrant bark and needles of the deodars. The astringent scent cleared his head. Clarity proved undesirable. He wasn't much of a drinker, but now he wanted a beer and a shot. The stars looked hard. They were bright, too, in the cloudless sky, but the feeling he got from them was hardness. Neither the back steps nor the floorboards of the porch creaked. He had plenty of time to keep the place in good, tight condition. After gutting the kitchen, he himself had built the cabinets. They were cherry wood with a dark stain. He had laid the tile floor in black granite squares. The granite countertops matched the floor, clean and simple. He had intended to do the whole house in that style, but then he had lost his way. He poured a cold bottle of Guinness stout into a mug, spiked it with bourbon. When he did drink, he wanted punch in both the texture and the taste. He was making a pastrami sandwich when the phone rang. Hello? The caller did not respond even when Billy said hello again. Ordinarily, he would have thought the line was dead. Not this evening. Listening, he fished the typewritten message from his pocket. He unfolded it and smoothed it flat on the black granite counter. Hollow as a bell, but a bell without a clapper, the open line carried no fizz of static. Billy couldn't hear the caller inhale or exhale, as if the guy were dead and done with breathing. Whether prankster or killer, the man's purpose was to taunt, intimidate. Billy didn't give him the satisfaction of a third hello. They listened to each other's silence as if something could be learned from nothing. After perhaps a minute, Billy began to wonder if he might be imagining a presence on the far end of the line. If he was, in fact, ear to ear with the author of the note, hanging up first would be a mistake. His disconnection would be taken as a sign of fear, or at least of weakness. Life had taught him patience. Besides, his self-image included the possibility that he could be fatuous, so he didn't worry about looking foolish. He waited. When the caller hung up, the distinct sound of the disconnect proved that he had been there, and then the dial tone. Before continuing to make his sandwich, Billy walked the 4 rooms and bath. He lowered the pleated shades over all the windows. At the dinette table in the kitchen, he ate the sandwich and 2 dill pickles. He drank a second stout, this time without the added bourbon. He had no TV. The entertainment shows bored him, and he didn't need the news. His thoughts were his only company at dinner. He did not linger over the pastrami sandwich. Books lined one wall of the living room from floor to ceiling. For most of his life, Billy had been a voracious reader. He had lost interest in reading 3 years, 10 months, and 4 days previously. A mutual love of books, of fiction in all genres, had brought him and Barbara together. On one shelf stood a set of Dickens in match bindings, which Barbara had given him for Christmas. She'd had a passion for Dickens. These days he needed to keep busy. Just sitting in a chair with a book made him restless. He felt vulnerable somehow. Besides, some books contained disturbing ideas. They started you thinking about things you want to forget. And though your thoughts became intolerable, you could not put them to rest. The coffered ceiling of the living room was a consequence of his need to remain busy. Every coffer was trimmed with dentil molding. The center of each featured a cluster of acanthus leaves, hand-carved from white oak, stained to match the surrounding mahogany. The style of this ceiling suited neither a cabin nor a bungalow. He didn't care. The project had kept him occupied for months.